Evan Cole had been riding for days without knowing exactly where he was going. The sun was sharp above him, the wind was dry, and the land felt endless. His shirt was dusty, his boots were worn, and the small bag he carried barely held anything useful. He had lost almost everything in the last months. His horse had gone lame, his savings had disappeared during a slow season, and no ranch in the nearby towns had space for another hand. People liked to say the West was full of chances, but Evan had not seen many of them. He kept walking only because stopping meant giving up, and he was not ready for that. By noon, he reached a small roadside inn where travelers came to drink water and rest. Evan stepped inside, hoping someone might know of a place that needed help. The old man running the counter looked at him as if he had already seen too many like him, tired, broke, hopeful. Evan asked if any ranch nearby was hiring. The man scratched his beard, leaned closer, and lowered his voice as if he didn't want others to hear. "There's one ranch," he said, "but I wouldn't send even my worst enemy there." Evan straightened, confused. "Why? What's wrong with it?" "It's owned by a woman who lives alone," the man replied. "Tallest person I've ever seen, strong as a wall, a widow named Mara Hale. Folks say she hires ranch hands, but none of them stay long. Some don't come back at all." Evan frowned. He didn't like the way the man said it. Rumors always grew bigger than the truth. "What happened to those men?" he asked. The man shrugged. "No one knows. They go in, do a bit of work, then leave suddenly. Some don't say goodbye, some leave their pay behind, and one or two just never showed up anywhere again. People started saying that place is unlucky." Evan let out a slow breath. He had heard many strange stories while traveling, and most of them turned out to be silly or twisted. But he also knew desperate times required taking chances. "Where is this ranch?" he asked. The man hesitated, then pointed toward a narrow path that cut through a valley. "Follow that trail. It's about 4 miles west. You'll know it when you see a tall wooden gate. But think twice, son." Evan nodded, thanked him, and walked out. He knew he should worry, but he also knew he couldn't afford to be scared. Hunger pressed harder than fear. Work meant food, a place to sleep, and maybe a new start. Whatever waited for him at that ranch couldn't be worse than losing everything. He followed the path as the sun dipped lower. The valley was quiet except for the soft rustle of dry grass. After nearly an hour, he saw a wide gate made of thick, dark wood. It stood taller than any gate he had seen on a ranch. He stepped closer and noticed the name carved across the top, Hale Ranch. Before he could call out, he heard a heavy step behind the gate. The gate opened slowly, and a woman stepped forward. She was tall, much taller than him, and broad-shouldered. Her dark hair was tied back, her clothes were simple, and her face showed strength, not harshness. Her eyes were steady, watching him like she was trying to understand him in one look. "You're on my land," she said quietly. "I'm looking for work," Evan replied. He kept his voice respectful. "I heard you might be hiring." She studied him without speaking. Her gaze wasn't unfriendly, but it held something tired, something guarded, something that warned him she had seen too much. Finally, she stepped closer. Standing near her made him feel small, but not in a bad way, more like standing near a tall pine tree. Impressive, steady, rooted. "Before you enter," she said, "I need you to understand something." Evan felt the air grow still. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice was calm, but the words carried weight. "Men who enter my ranch never return. Do you still want the job?" For a moment the world felt silent. No wind, no birds, just her words echoing in his head. She didn't say it as a threat. She said it like someone who had repeated it many times and carried sadness each time she spoke it. Maybe she had seen too many people leave her behind. Maybe the truth was simpler than the rumors. Evan swallowed hard but didn't step back. "I don't plan to run," he said. "All I need is honest work." Her eyes softened, but only a little. Honest work is what I offer, she replied. But this ranch is not an easy place. You need to be sure. I'm sure, he said, even though he wasn't fully sure. But he was sure that he needed this chance. She lifted one hand and pushed the gate open wider. Then come in. He walked through. The gate shut behind him with a deep sound that made his heart jump. For a second, he wondered if he had made a mistake. But when he looked around, he saw only an old ranch with empty buildings, broken fences, and tall grass swaying in the breeze. Nothing strange, nothing dangerous, nothing that matched the rumors. This place is big, he said, trying to distract himself. It used to be full of workers, Mara said. Now it's just me. Her voice had a hint of loneliness, and Evan felt a small pull in his chest. He knew what it felt like to be alone longer than you wanted. She led him toward a barn. You can sleep here. It's clean, and the roof doesn't leak. I'll bring you food later. Your work starts tomorrow. If you feel uneasy at any point, you can leave. I don't force anyone to stay. Her words didn't match the dark stories he'd heard. She didn't seem dangerous. She seemed tired. Tired of people. Tired of rumors. Tired of things going wrong. Thank you, Evan said quietly. She nodded once and walked away, her steps steady, her figure strong against the fading light. Evan watched her go, trying to understand what kind of life she lived here alone on such a large, silent ranch. He placed his bag down on a clean spot in the barn and took a long breath. This place was strange, yes. The warnings were strange, too. But the woman who owned this land didn't feel like a threat. She felt like someone protecting something. Maybe herself, maybe the ranch, maybe a story she didn't want to tell. As the sky turned orange, he walked outside and looked toward the distant hills. The land was quiet, peaceful even. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen lingered here. Not something harmful, just something hidden. When Mara returned with a plate of food, she didn't speak much. She handed him the plate, told him he would start with repairing the old fences, and walked away again. Evan noticed she always checked the hills before entering the house, like she expected someone, good or bad, to appear. Later, after eating, Evan lay down on the hay and stared at the ceiling. He thought of the old man's warning, the strange stories, and the look in Mara's eyes when she told him men never returned. Maybe the truth was simple. Maybe the men who left weren't harmed. They just didn't understand her, didn't want to stay, or didn't have the patience for a lonely ranch run by a giant widow who carried more burdens than she deserved. He promised himself he would not judge her based on rumors. He would judge her based on what he saw with his own eyes. He closed his eyes and let sleep find him, not knowing that this ranch would soon change his life in ways he could not imagine. Not knowing that the woman who stood tall and alone would become the center of his story. Not knowing that he had just walked through a gate that many feared. But he might be the first man strong enough to stay. And as the night settled over the valley, Evan Cole did not feel fear. He felt the beginning of something new. Evan woke early the next morning, long before the sun had fully risen. The barn was cool and quiet, and for a moment he forgot he was on a ranch that people whispered about. He stretched his tired muscles, brushed the dust from his shirt, and stepped outside. The sky was painted with soft colors, pink, orange, and a bit of gold. It was a peaceful sight, but the ranch itself looked lonely, like it had been waiting a long time for someone to take care of it. He walked toward the main yard, hoping to find Mara before he started work. He saw her near the water trough, lifting a heavy wooden beam with ease, trying to stabilize it against a fence. She was so tall and strong that the beam looked lighter than it should have been. When she noticed him, she placed it down gently, wiped her hands on her apron, and nodded. "You're awake early," she said. "Habit," Evan replied. Most ranches start work before sunrise. That used to be the way here, she said quietly. But things changed. Evan didn't ask what she meant. He could see the ranch had once been lively. There were too many empty stalls in the barn, too many unused sheds, and too many marks in the ground showing where old equipment had once been. This land had history, and not all of it good. Mara handed him a list written neatly on a scrap of paper. Start with the south fence. It's falling apart. If you repair even half today, that will be good enough. I'll bring you lunch later. Evan nodded and set off. The south fence ran along the edge of the ranch, close to a slope that overlooked the valley. When he reached it, he understood why Mara needed help. The fence was broken in several places, the posts leaning like tired old men. The paint was peeling, the nails rusted, and parts of the wood had been chewed by animals or softened by rain. Fixing it would take days, maybe a week. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The hammering echoed across the valley, each strike steady and determined. It felt good to use his hands again. Even though the work was hard, it was honest, and Evan had always liked work that kept him moving. The smell of wood, dust, and warm morning air brought him a small sense of comfort. But as he worked, he felt something strange. Every time he paused, it seemed like the ranch watched him. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was curious, almost expectant. He pushed the thought away and kept hammering. A few hours later, he heard steps behind him. He turned and saw Mara approaching with a basket of food. She walked slower than usual, as if she didn't want to frighten him or interrupt his focus. "You've done a lot already," she said, glancing at the repaired posts. "Most men I hired complained before noon." "I don't mind hard work," Evan said. "It helps keep the mind quiet." Mara gave a small, gentle smile. "Then you'll fit here better than most." She handed him the basket and stepped back, watching the horizon again. She did that often, staring out as if expecting someone to show up. Evan followed her gaze but saw nothing except hills and sky. "Do you get visitors here?" he asked casually. "Not anymore," she replied. Her voice was careful, almost guarded. "People stayed away after things went wrong." Evan waited, hoping she would explain more, but she didn't. Instead, she pointed toward a small cluster of sheds in the distance. "When you finish the fence this week, I'll need help clearing the storage sheds. They're full of old things left behind." He wondered what she meant by left behind. But once again, he didn't ask. Something about her tone made it clear she only shared what she was ready to share. After lunch, Mara returned to the house, and Evan kept working. As the sun rose higher, he noticed more signs that the ranch wasn't as empty as it looked. There were footprints near the fence, fresh ones, but not from him or Mara. Some were small, some large. The dirt was disturbed near the edge of the property, like someone had walked there recently. He crouched down, studying them. They didn't look like animal prints. They looked like someone had been standing there, watching. He looked up at the hills again. Nothing moved. Evan finished another section of the fence before taking a short rest under a tall mesquite tree. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, drank from the water flask Mara had given him, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. Maybe the footprints were old. Maybe he was imagining things. But deep down, he knew he wasn't. Later in the afternoon, as he worked his way down the fence line, he passed an old shed he hadn't noticed before. The door was slightly open, and the wood had dark stains on it. Not dangerous ones, just old and weathered. Inside he saw old barrels, broken tools, ropes, and a few torn jackets hanging from hooks. Jackets from different men. He stepped closer and noticed initials stitched into one of them. He didn't know who it belonged to, but the jacket looked like it had been hanging there for years. Why would someone leave without taking their jacket? He thought about the stories again, men coming but never returning. The old man at the inn had sounded convinced the ranch was cursed, but the jackets didn't look like signs of something bad happening. They looked like signs of people leaving in a hurry, maybe out of fear or confusion. Evan left the shed and returned to his work. He didn't want to assume anything. Workers came and went all the time on ranches. Maybe they simply didn't care enough to take their belongings. When evening came, Mara returned. Her steps were slow, heavy, as if she had been thinking deeply about something. She looked at the fence and nodded approvingly. "You work faster than I expected," she said. "I just did what I could," Evan replied, brushing dust from his hands. Mara leaned against a nearby post and crossed her arms. For the first time since he arrived, she looked relaxed. "You didn't ask questions?" she said softly. "Most men ask too many." Evan shrugged. "If it's important, you'll tell me when you're ready." Mara's eyes softened again. She looked grateful for his patience. "This ranch, it wasn't always like this," she said slowly. "There was a time when it was full of life, full of people. My husband and I built it with our own hands. But after he passed, everything changed. Some workers left because they felt the ranch lost its luck. Others left because trouble kept coming our way." "What kind of trouble?" Evan asked gently. Mara hesitated. "People wanted this land," she said. "Some still do. They tried to scare me away, but I refused to leave. I've lived here my whole life. This ranch is all I have." Evan understood now why she looked at the hills so often. She wasn't waiting for someone. She was watching for danger. And maybe the men who left didn't vanish. Maybe they were simply afraid of getting caught in whatever conflict chased her. "I'm not afraid of work," Evan said, "and I'm not afraid of hills." A small laugh escaped her, short but real. It was the first time he heard her laugh. "I can see that," she replied. "But be careful. This land can test a man. Some don't like being tested." "I'll manage," he said with a steady voice. As they walked back toward the house, Evan felt the ranch growing less strange by the minute. It didn't feel cursed or dangerous. It felt troubled. It felt abandoned. It felt like a place that needed someone willing to stay. When he reached the barn, Mara paused. "If you ever feel unsafe, tell me," she said. "I don't want anyone to be harmed because of me. Not again." "Nothing will happen," Evan assured her. "You're not alone anymore." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded and walked away. Evan settled into the barn for the night, thinking about everything he had seen, the footprints, the jackets, the way Mara guarded the land like it was her last breath. He felt tired, but he also felt something new, purpose. He didn't know what danger was lurking or why this ranch had seen so many men leave, but he knew one thing clearly. He wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Not until he understood the truth behind this quiet valley and the giant widow who lived in its heart. Evan woke before dawn on the third day, the same quiet uneasiness still sitting inside his chest. The ranch looked peaceful from the outside. Calm sky, soft morning breeze, birds waking in the nearby trees, but something underneath that calm felt unsettled. He had felt watch the day before, and the footprints near the fence had not been his or Mara's. Someone had been there. Someone had been close. He stepped out of the barn and stretched his arms. A faint mist covered the fields, drifting gently across the old buildings. The ranch, though worn and tired, looked almost beautiful in the soft light. He began walking toward the tool shed to gather supplies for a new day of work, but halfway there he paused. Mara was already in the yard, standing completely still, her eyes fixed on the distant ridge. He followed her gaze but saw nothing. No movement, no dust, no shadow. Still, her body language told him she sensed something. "Morning," Evan said as he approached. Mara didn't blink at first. She kept staring at the hills, then slowly lowered her gaze. "Morning," she finally replied. Her voice sounded calm, but her eyes carried tension. You okay? He asked softly. Yes, she said. Then after a moment added, I don't like when the hills are too quiet. It usually means someone is hiding, waiting. Evan felt a chill slide down his spine. He remembered the footprints, the disturbed soil. Someone was watching the ranch, but he didn't want to worry her more than she already was. I didn't see anything yet, he said gently. Maybe it's just animals. Maybe, Mara agreed, but he could tell she didn't fully believe it. She handed him a small list of tasks. Today he would be repairing the north fence and clearing the ground around one of the sheds. Mara explained everything carefully, like she always did, but she kept glancing at the hills every few minutes. She wasn't scared. She was cautious, protective, and very aware of her surroundings. Before leaving him to work, she said, If you hear anything strange, call for me. Don't go near the hills alone. Evan nodded. He didn't plan on wandering far anyway. He walked to the north fence with a hammer and a coil of wire. This part of the ranch sat closer to the ridge and had a wider view of the valley. As he worked, he felt the same prickling sensation on the back of his neck, like eyes following him. He turned quickly. Nothing. But the wind shifted, brushing through the grass in a rhythm that didn't feel natural. Something or someone was out there. He just couldn't see it. He kept hammering, focusing on his work. Every few minutes, he looked back at the ridge. He didn't see movement, but he did see something else, a glimmer. A small flash, like the reflection of light off metal. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the flash appeared again, very faint, like someone holding something shiny, maybe binoculars, maybe something else. He stood still, holding the hammer tightly. That was when he heard a soft crunch behind him, grass bending under a step. He spun around. Mara stood several feet away, breathing steady but eyes sharp. You felt it too, she said quietly. Evan nodded. There's someone on the ridge. Something flashed. I know. She stepped closer. Even though she was strong and calm, he could see the frustration in her face. They watch from there. They wait. They don't come close unless they think I'm alone. Who are they? Evan asked. The same men who tried to claim my land before, she replied. After my husband passed, they thought this ranch would fall into their hands. They tried to scare me away, but I stayed. Since then, they come and go waiting for me to give up. Evan felt a tightness in his chest. And the workers who left? Some left because they were scared. Some didn't want trouble. Some tried to help and got lost on the way to town. I don't know if those men harmed them or not. All I know is no one stayed long enough to protect this place. And you? He asked. How have you protected it all alone? Mara looked at the ridge, her eyes fierce. By standing here. By not giving them a chance to push me out. They think a widow should not own land. They think a woman cannot guard a ranch, but I won't stop. Not for them, not for fear. Her voice was steady, but Evan could hear the weight she carried. Years of worry, years of being outnumbered, years of fighting without help. Evan spoke with quiet firmness. You're not alone anymore. Mara's eyes met his, and this time she didn't look away quickly. I hope you mean that. Truly, I do. She nodded once and returned to the house. Evan kept working, but now he understood why the ranch carried such heavy silence. It wasn't cursed. It was watched. It wasn't dangerous on its own. Danger came from outside. Mara wasn't strange. She was tired. Tired of fighting shadows on the ridge. Tired of losing people who promised to help. By afternoon, Evan had repaired most of the fence and moved on to clearing brush from the old shed. As he pulled away tangled branches, he found more signs of disturbance. Broken twigs, fresh footprints, marks on the ground where someone had knelt. footprints leading toward the ranch, and footprints leading away. He followed them with his eyes until they disappeared into the grass. Whoever had come close knew how to hide their trail. A rustling noise made him freeze. He looked toward the ridge again. A figure moved behind a rock. Evan couldn't see their face or clothes clearly, but he knew someone was there, watching him, judging how new he was, judging if he was a threat or an easy man to scare off. Evan clenched his jaw and turned his back deliberately, refusing to show fear. He picked up the hammer again and struck a nail into a post with loud, sharp force. The sound carried across the valley. A quiet message. I see you. I'm not running. When he returned to the house later, Mara was on the porch. She looked tired, her shoulders heavy as if holding years of stress. They were close today, Evan said. She nodded slowly. I know. I felt it. Then, more quietly, I hoped they would not return so soon. Why don't they just come in? Evan asked. Because they want the land without a fight, she replied. If they harm anyone openly, the town will get involved. They prefer to scare, to wait, to watch. Evan sat on the porch steps, facing the darkening sky. The sunset painted the hills red, and shadows stretched long across the ranch. Mara stood behind him, her tall frame blocking the wind. You've carried this alone for too long, Evan said. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. I didn't choose to be alone. People just left, or they felt the ranch wasn't worth the trouble. Do you think I'll leave? He asked. She slowly shook her head. No. Something about you is different. Evan looked up at her. I'm not scared of shadows, and I'm not leaving you to face them alone. A long silence followed. Not awkward, but heavy with meaning. The ranch felt different now, less empty, less vulnerable. Mara's posture eased, her shoulders relaxing just a little. Night settled over the valley. Crickets started singing, and the stars appeared one by one. Evan could feel the change inside him, a quiet certainty that he belonged here now, that he had stepped into something bigger than a job. He wasn't just fixing fences. He wasn't just earning wages. He was standing beside someone who had fought alone for too long. He was ready to face whatever came from those hills. And for the first time since he arrived, Evan felt the ranch accept him, not as another passing worker, but as someone who might finally stay. Evan woke on the fourth morning with a different feeling inside him. The fear he had felt earlier in the week had changed into something calm, steady, and firm. He had seen the watchers on the ridge. He had heard the stories. He had found the old jackets left by men who ran away, and he had listened to Mara's quiet truths. Now he understood more clearly than ever that the ranch didn't push people away. Fear did. Loneliness did. Trouble did. But the ranch itself simply needed someone brave enough to stay. When he stepped outside the barn, Mara was already awake, standing near the corral. The sky behind her was pale and soft, the sun not yet strong enough to warm the land. She looked peaceful for the first time since he had arrived, almost like she had slept well. When she saw him, she offered a small smile, not big, not loud, but gentle and honest. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Evan replied. She walked toward him with slow steps, the ground crunching lightly under her boots. "You've been a big help these last days," she said. "More than I expected. More than anyone else has been in years." Evan shrugged a little. "I'm just doing the work." "No," she said softly. "It's more than the work. You haven't run away. You haven't asked to leave. You haven't let worry control you. Most men did." "I told you I wouldn't run," Evan replied. "And I meant it." Mara looked at him for a long moment. There was warmth in her eyes now, something she had probably not allowed herself to feel for a long time. "I know," she said, "but it still surprises me." She turned toward the house and motioned for him to follow. "Come eat before you start work. You can't fix anything on an empty stomach." Evan followed her inside. The house was old but clean, filled with small touches of care. Flowers on the table, polished wood, neatly folded linens. It was clear that even though Mara lived alone, she kept the home full of life in her own quiet way. Breakfast was simple: warm bread, eggs, and fresh water from the well. As they ate, Evan studied the room. There were pictures on the walls, one of a younger Mara standing beside her husband, both smiling proudly in front of a new-built barn. Evan felt a small ache inside him. She had lost a lot, yet she was still here, still standing tall, still fighting for what was hers. After breakfast, Evan returned to the yard and started repairing the last section of the north fence. Mara stayed nearby today, helping him hold posts steady and carrying tools. She didn't talk much, but her presence alone felt strong, protective, and comforting. By midday, the wind began to pick up. Dust swirled across the open fields. Evan and Mara paused to catch their breath when Mara suddenly lifted her head and looked toward the ridge again. Evan followed her gaze instantly. A shadow moved behind a rock, not a trick of light this time, not imagination. Someone was definitely there. Mara's expression didn't show fear, just annoyance and a tired kind of readiness. "They're back," she said quietly. "They want to see if you'll leave too." Evan steadied his voice. "I won't." She looked at him with a long, thoughtful gaze. "You may say that now, but many men said the same thing before walking away the next morning." "I'm not like them," Evan replied calmly. "I'm staying as long as you need help." Mara's eyes softened. "I'm beginning to believe that." They continued working, and after a while, the shadow disappeared from the ridge. Whoever was watching left without causing trouble, for now at least. The quiet, however, felt different this time, less frightening, more defeated, as if the watchers finally understood she was not alone anymore. When the fence was finished, Mara looked at the long, straight line of sturdy posts and wires. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, almost like she was releasing years of heaviness. "I haven't seen this place look this strong in a long time," she said. "My husband would have been grateful. He loved this ranch more than anyone." Evan smiled gently. "It still has life in it." "Yes," she whispered. "It does." They walked back to the house as the afternoon sun softened. The ranch didn't look lonely anymore. It looked alive. There were new footprints, his footprints, around the sheds and fences. The tools were cleaned and organized. The buildings looked cared for again. The land itself seemed to breathe easier. Evan rested on the porch steps while Mara stood near the railing, looking out at the fields. The wind brushed her hair back, and for the first time, she looked peaceful instead of worried. "You know," she said softly, "I always thought this ranch would die with me. That I would be the last to stand here. That no one else would ever stay long enough to understand why I fight for it." "And now?" Evan asked. "And now," she said, turning to him, "I feel like the land is waking again. Because of you." Evan didn't know what to say at first. He looked down at his hands, rough from work, then up at her, tall, strong, gentle, and carrying more history than she ever admitted aloud. "I didn't come here to change anything," he said. "I came because I didn't have a place to go." "That may be how it started," Mara replied, "but that's not why you stayed." Evan lifted his eyes. "No, it's not." The silence between them felt full, warm, honest, meaningful. Mara took a slow step closer, her voice softening even more. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and you can answer honestly. I won't hold it against you." "Ask," Evan said. "Do you want to stay here? Not just for the work, not just for a few days. I mean truly stay." Evan felt his heartbeat steady, not quicken. The answer was clear in him, gentle and sure. "Yes," he said simply. "I want to stay." Mara's shoulders eased and a small breath escaped her. Relief, gratitude, maybe even hope. "Then stay," she whispered. "Stay as long as you want." "This ranch has room for you, and so do I." The words warmed Evan more than the sun ever could. As the day ended, they walked the ranch together. Two people once surrounded by loneliness, now sharing steps side by side. The ranch no longer felt empty. It felt protected. It felt alive. And in the quiet of the approaching night, the hills stood still with no shadows watching. Evan knew the trouble might return someday, but he also knew he wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. He found a home on land that others feared. Mara found someone who didn't leave. And the ranch that once carried silence began to carry hope. For the first time in years, two hearts, one worn by life, one searching for belonging, finally found the place where both could rest. And Evan Cole, the man who once had nothing, returned every day to the ranch he now called home.